Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 9th event in the series of monthly webinars entitled New War and Peace, organized by the editorial board of the Caucasus edition. My name is Sevil Hussein. I'm a co-editor of the Caucasus edition. This series serves as the public forum for scholars, practitioners, and policy analysts from Armenia, Azerbaijan, and internationally to analyze the past, present, and the future of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the respective peace process. My colleague Philip Gamagelian is co-moderator today's webinar. He is co-editor of the Caucasus edition and the associated professor of the University of San Diego. And today we are joined by two speakers, two well-known political analysts. Zaur Shiriyev, he is South Caucasus analyst at International Crisis Group, and Asbed Kotchikian, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at American University of Armenia and Advisory Board member at Caucasus Edition. Phil, are you there? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sevil, and welcome to everybody who joined us today. So a lot of you are regulars now in these webinars, so we'll not do too long of an introduction. Very briefly to remind of the format, we will have about 30-40 minutes introductory interactive discussion between the speakers, followed by Q&A session. So if you have questions to Asbed and Zaur, please press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and post the question there, and we will try to answer as many as we can. And if you have a comment rather than question, the chat window, I believe, should open, and you should be able to post it there that everybody can see, including the rest of the audience. So without further ado, let me turn to the panelists, and thank you, Zaur and Asbed, for joining us for another time. We became regulars, and that's very much appreciated to see the progression of this year with your help. And we had a pretty difficult 2021. That followed, of course, the end of the Second Karabakh War. So the year was very brought more uncertainty, in my view, than certainty. And we've seen a lot of chances potentially for restart of negotiations, followed by periods of escalation. The last month was particularly busy with meetings. So I guess looking back at the year, what would be your thoughts about the key developments? What are the key dynamics that you see developing throughout the 2021. Asbed, would you like to start?
I would like to start. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Sevil, for the introduction. I'm not sure about the well-known part, but perhaps infamous. So what I'm going to do briefly and sort of succinctly is to make a couple of observations and also talk about and have a couple of comments about the year, sort of the last year, from obviously observations based on political developments in Armenia, but also regionally that were precipitated by the Second Karabakh War. And as you were saying it, the word Second Karabakh War, for an instant, an idea came to my mind. I wonder if at some point down the line, are we going to talk about the Third Karabakh War and so on? So you have to number, it's like the sequel, not unlike any other sequels. The political dimension or the political landscape in Armenia in 2021 basically came at the footsteps of the crushing defeat of the Second Karabakh War and the increased political turmoil in the country. claims of a military coup when the army chief of staff and 40 officers or so wrote a letter asking for Pashinyan's resignation, followed by, in March, announcement that there will be snap elections. We have talked elsewhere before about the post-election phenomenon or the post-election landscape. I'm not going to go into details. But one of the key components here to keep in mind, and that actually those are big factors, is the issue of border incursions, border tension, if you want to call it, rather more often than not incursions, at the same time transport corridors. These two are very closely related to the issue of finalizing the Armenia-Azerbaijan agreement, as well as to some extent Turkey-Armenia sort of relations. I have to mention that Nagorno-Karabakh has become a catch-all issue for Armenia these days, politically speaking, for political issues and so on. What I mean by that is that just as it was an issue for Azerbaijan for the longest time to ignore or put aside social, political, economic, other political issues, it has become the main thing. In conversation with various individuals, international community, as well as local individuals, it seems that nothing else matters. This itself is problematic because sustaining and developing any kind of a future, one cannot just focus on a conflict that has, one way or another, depends on whom you ask, is resolved. The border incursion issues is something that is quite interesting to see in a sense that now that Azerbaijan, from their perspective, from Baku's perspective, they achieved what they wanted to achieve. They are upping the ante on Armenia, with the hope that the more pressure they put, the more Armenia will concede. This is a bit of a challenge, because the way I see it, this is not an observation anymore, the way I see it, the more pressure, the more Aliyev escalates the pressure, the political turmoil in Armenia because of incursions where people would say, see, the government, the current Armenian government is unable to basically provide security, the more political turmoil will there be, which is not necessarily in the interest of Azerbaijan. I think to a large extent, Azerbaijan was relieved, Baku was relieved with the election result. And basically, they have a I wanted to call it a partner, but they have a counterpart, which is weak and is unable to impose or even confirm or affirm its perspective. And any chance or any opportunity that the opposition, be that in the form of former President Robert Kotchikian or others, would come to power, that would not be in the good interest of Azerbaijan. Not that they have anything to worry about. Again, this is the whole thing about wars, right? The victor is always infallible. They think that they have the upper hand, which they do. Now, other than the border incursions, the transport corridors has been the key point that Aliyev has been pushing, and the reaction in Armenia has been equally sort of reflective or recessive, let's call it. Meetings in recent months in Sochi, in Brussels, have dealt with that, and just recently, the Armenian government, Armenian Prime Minister, basically managed to announce that there are talks about opening railway Yeresk all the way to Megri and down via Nakhichevan and to Azerbaijan. But it's fascinating to see that these issues are not discussed in essence, in details, in Armenian political landscape. In recent months, one of the things that I kept thinking is that the current Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, is the Prime Minister who cried wolf. There is always, but the wolf is not the real wolf in the sense that Whenever there is an issue, whenever there is an opposition, he always reflects on that, and he actually designates that as an attempt to destabilize Armenia and so on and so forth. Now, the credibility of the prime minister himself is not something to envy. And within that context, I think this is where the issue of Karabakh comes into play. In other words, the main question that we need to realize, and probably this goes into perspectives of future perspective, is that does Armenia have anything to do with Karabakh anymore? From other observations, I have noticed that Stepanakert does not, and I'm using the word again to spare people angry notes and so on, de facto sort of name. Stepanakert is not looking towards Yerevan for any advice, nor for any security guarantees. Today, Stepanakert's gaze is towards Moscow. And when it comes to the issue of Karabakh and any kind of a formulation of coexistence, Moscow is the one who's calling the shots. But what we are looking at is Armenia-Azerbaijan normalization of relations. And that includes border delimitation and so on and so forth. Speaking of normalization, when people say history repeats itself, it's quite interesting, but I mean, we all know that. We didn't know that it repeats itself so often and so quickly. When I look at issues related to Armenia-Turkey normalizations, this is one of the key issues as well that is being pushed in parallel. In other words, Turkey has expressed that they're going to appoint envoys with Armenia to discuss the opening of border and establishing diplomatic relations. But this is exactly the kind of conversation, and almost verbatim, you would see news media and political analysts repeating what was said in 2009 when a similar sort of endeavor took place, the Zurich protocols, let's call it. In all of this, what does that mean? I think to a large extent, Armenia is on the verge of achieving results. I'm not saying good results or bad results, or on the verge of basically normalizing the region. Unfortunately, Georgia seems to be left out of this processes. Recently, there was a meeting of the three regional big countries plus the three Caucasus countries, South Caucasus countries, which Georgia sort of boycotted. And in this context, the problem is that Armenia does not have the software nor the hardware to achieve that. What I mean by that is the software, diplomatically speaking, the diplomatic software and the diplomatic hardware. They do not have the diplomatic hardware, meaning they do not have seasoned diplomats. To a large extent, Pashinyan managed to either isolate, alienate, or dismiss people. There are no cadres who can actually are trained as diplomat, the art of diplomacy. That's the hardware. But more importantly, the software that this hardware operates in is also missing. It has always been missing, but it's more accentuated now. And what I mean by software is strategic thinking. It's about taking initiatives whenever opportunities arise. And these are the two major challenges, which also, in a way, relegated the discussions between Armenia and Azerbaijan on the Armenian side to Moscow, as well as the discussions between Armenia and Turkey under the watchful eyes of Moscow. Russia has been more ambiguous about Armenia-Azerbaijan relations than it has been on Turkish-Armenian relations or Turkey-Armenia relations. The foreign ministry, Russian foreign ministry, repeatedly mentioned that they are in favor of supporting both sides to normalize relations. And this is not an assessment in any way. Is it good or bad? That's something else. It becomes in the field of domestic politics and so on. I'm neither an economist nor aspire to any political position. So I'm not, I'm sure it can be viewed there. So it's quite interesting to see what is Russia's, I'm not going to call it endgame, but what is Russia's overall perception about what is it going to gain from Turkey-Armenia normalization. On the other hand, keeping the Nagorno-Karabakh issue a valid or an ongoing issue without actually permanently solving it is within Russia's interest as well. You know, almost over a year has passed within the 5-year mandate that Russian peacemakers, peace creators, peacekeepers were assigned to. And that's one of the things that we need to also keep an eye on. This is in some my initial thoughts about the overall evaluation and contextualizing the Karabakh issue within the context, within regional context. Thank you.
Thank you, Asbed. Zaur?
Thank you, Asbed. So, I mean, every Azerbaijani or Armenian can answer this question differently, and the answer may be different for someone living on the border, displaced people, or someone living in the capital, or who is not in the region at all. So, but answers given by those who suffered the most from the conflict is much more valuable, personal to me. I mean, so that's why. So, what we are going to say is not a generalization, or it's not it's only that how we see this the process. So you know that there's an old Russian joke that asks that describing one word it says that is good, in 2 words it's not good. So I don't want to describe in 1 or 2 words though. So I will look to the 2 different issues. One is that Azerbaijan Armenian normalization issue. The second issue is mostly about a domestic or international linked issue. The first I would like to talk a little bit about the societal the perception. I think the main disappointment for me, or what I see, is that there hasn't been a success in terms of minimizing gap between the 2 societies and the fostering empathy. So the pre-war situation is continuous, and so especially the situation on the border, also the tensions in general over the year, all makes people to believe less to the peaceful, peaceful living or peaceful conditions. So this is the bad sign. But at the same time, I think there are some signs that.
The problem with Zaur's internet, I guess.
Let's give it a few more seconds, and then hopefully he joins.
Yeah, until he joins. It's quite interesting, Zaur's perspective. When we had our previous conversation, it was, I mean, I'm not sure his background training, but a sociologist in terms of always looking at society rather than the political, not always, but also considering the sociological component, the society component. So he rejoined us. I just tried to fill in the awkward silence and not interrupt him.
The internet connection is not so good, so sorry about that. So the first issue that I try to say a few words about the societal dimension, and I don't see that there is such movement, but also there's some bright voices that I mentioned earlier. So, and this should be much more focus of international agenda, or this the Western countries also should focus more. Also the dimension domestically, they should be given a much more voice, or much more chance to discussion between the groups of people. The second issue, so I think Azerbaijan starting off this year differentiated or divided the topics that related to Karabakh is that mostly bilateral issue between Baku and Moscow. So this is the policy line. And the second, and the Azerbaijan sees the Azerbaijan Armenian dimension, or the issues is mostly about this border issue, the communication channels, transport corridor, and other related issues. So this is the policy line we see from Azerbaijani side. So that means that anything related to Armenian populated Karabakh, or where the Russian responsibility, temporary responsibility zone, it's a kind of the frozen. So we don't see any kind of development. and resume of any kind of the diplomatic negotiation on this track is not seen, and I don't think that there will be a we can see any chance to return to this, because the priorities and the expectation has changed after the war. So that's why the focus right now, the more to international border areas and transport corridors. So that's why this Armenian Azerbaijan bilateral relation is based on this the two issues. So there were many disappointments. Unlike, I think that Asbed, I am much more optimistic, especially after the Sochi meeting and after also the leaders meeting in Brussels, for one fact that at least they clarified what transport corridor means. So and especially the transport corridor dimension about this, it's not going to be threaten the territorial integrity, or they will be respect to territorial integrity to both sides. So this is important. So we are not talking about the extraterritorial dimension of any transport corridor. So this is how it was described in media, how it was perceived at least, and also this that's why, despite of this, the sides agreed to start a work about the border delimitation. There's one caveat, is that Russia, unlike the Transport Corridor Commission, Russia took an advisory role. So it's interesting, because in the advisory role, it means that Russia doesn't want to be blamed any, let's say, non-progress of this issue, might be, or it also can be seen as a kind of the opportunity for other actors to involve to this process, the European Union or the civil society or other groups. So that's why we will see that which one is true. So about this border delimitation, and the last issue is the humanitarian issue. I think that this humanitarian issue makes the people feel differently about the future, and the Azerbaijan Armenian the future is especially for Baku, it's the mining work, and for Armenia is the Armenian detainees. I think at least after Sochi meeting, as far as we know, that Armenia delivered all remaining mine maps to Baku, and I think this humanitarian issue should be solved, should be priority right now, and to took off from the agenda, so to make it that it couldn't become again an agenda. I mean, this is to finding a way to release the detainees, and or to find a mechanism not to things happen again. So that's why this is the final things, and so and one more thing is that this is the perception. I believe that we see that Western countries, for example, focus to humanitarian issues, especially European Union delivered the humanitarian work, also invested, but still there are cautious optimism, also the different approach to this to conflict from some Western countries. And one disappointment that I see, at least from my personal point of view, that I see that there is some the states or the Western countries see this as a Russian backyard or Russian issue, and so either it's going to be used as an excuse not to involve anymore, or to significantly to this the problem solving between Azerbaijanis and Armenians, or it's the way that they don't see that they are part of this let's say 9 November agreement, so and there is no political weight of this country. So I think this perception, the changing of this perception will be beneficial for Azerbaijan and Armenians in next year.
Thank you, Zaur.
Zaur, excuse me, Phil. It's quite interesting when you say you dichotomized Russia's role, Turkish-Armenian relations being quite active, and being sort of a passive role when it comes to the issues of corridor, maybe because of plausible deniability. But in terms of not being blamed for that. So two things that I can infer from that. One is that Russia is not optimistic that it's going to happen, even though this is the push that Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Armenia to some extent, are advocating. But the other thing is that Russia has more vested. It comes back to the initial comment that I made. What would Russia gain from Turkish-Armenian normalization? So on the one hand, this is an issue, the latest war is an opportunity for Russia and Turkey to become partners. And Russia doesn't give a rat's ass about the situation in the South Caucasus because they're not investing, quote unquote, in the transport corridors or making it happen. Right? I mean,
yeah, I think that's what I said, the Russian role about the border delimitation and demarcation. So I said that this is the issue that Russia doesn't want to be blamed, because I can give one example that, so there's a state commission between Azerbaijan and Georgia about it, about this border delimitation, and it's still, the work is ongoing. So it's not finalized fully. So that's why we might see a the longer term period. So, but what Baku's interest is that to finalize this issue as soon as possible and or quickly, rather than the past experience. And I think that my question to you, so that you raised that Russian role, right, Russian optimism, is that, so what was the Russian interest in the back to 2009? What makes difference? So in Zurich protocols, Russia supported this process. So, and can we differentiate that Russian interest back to that time and now? So, or is it the same?
Yeah, of course. I mean, one of the things, the key differences, I would say, well, the level of involvement. Lavrov was there at the signing and so on. They strong-armed Armenia, but it seems that now Armenia and Turkey are moving faster towards that reconciliation. But the international environment, I think the change in the international environment is something that is a key difference. We're not talking about, we're talking about a regional sort of dimension, a regional architecture now. And I strongly believe in a way, you talked about perception that the West thinks that this is Russia's backyard, Russia's issue, and so on. I think that is quite a legitimate, it's not a perception, I think it's quite legitimate, but not just Russia's. It is Russia's and Turkey's. They have taken the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh and regional conflict and so on, and from an international dimension, and strongly entrenched it in a regional one, with Iran sort of tagging along. I mean, Iran is trying to be relevant without being useful or necessary, let's call it. And this is where the issue of Georgia comes in as well. If they don't realize that if Russia and Turkey are converging in terms of interest on an issue as contested as Armenia, what guarantees are there that they're not going to be converging on issues of Georgia? So I think the international dimension, the change in international dimension because of Trump's presidency, but also because of COVID and American isolationism, I think that's what makes Russia's sort of push juggernaut, if you want to call it, Russian foreign policy juggernaut, to push this. Again, behind closed doors, I'm not sure to what extent Armenia is the driving force, or it is the driver's side seat is taking the driver's side seat in this.
To follow up on this question, so if you look into next year, it seems like Karabakh will be taking a backseat in terms of any development. So the focus will be much more on Armenia-Azerbaijan border, but also Armenia-Turkey. Discuss Russia's role. What about Azerbaijan's? Because a big actor in 2009, non-normalization, a failure was Azerbaijan. So what's your assessment of Azerbaijan's role moving forward as Armenia and Turkey are trying to normalize?
Yeah, I think unlike the 2009 or 2008, I think the main disappointment or the driving force Azerbaijani being a veto player that time was that the Karabakh issue, especially. So the reason that Turkey closed the border was an issue. It's not resolved, and also I think that the main disappointment came from that. Just to remember that, just if you remember that 2008-9 was the intense discussion. Let's say intense the discussion, the period on negotiation on Karabakh. So it was the time that the Minsk group, the proposal or the principles developed, or it was there was a chance that the sides can sign any agreement or the basic principles. So that's why Azerbaijan saw this as a let's say making its any rapprochement or normalization will make Azerbaijan in a position weaker. in negotiation process that time. So, but right now, I think these issues are no longer a valid point. It's not the issue anymore. What's always in a perception is that I think I cannot talk on behalf of the, let's say, the government or anyone here, but I think there are some people still thinks that this might be foster more. This can foster normalization in regional wide much more easier than Azerbaijan Armenian, let's say, normalization. I mean, one example is that, let's say, when we talk about the transport corridor or the resuming of the economic relation between Baku and Yerevan, it will take the years, at least, let's say, a decade might be. And the benefit will come, might be 5, 6, 7 years later. So not immediately. We don't have any study. So I mean, the last study I think we have about the railway is that done by the International Alert in 2014. So, and their railway, let's say, the assessment was based on the fact of the Soviet time, let's say, information, and they say that in early years, 10 or 13 years, it will take the railway to benefit from this process. So that's why. But in case of the Turkey Armenia, it will be much more faster. It is already there are, let's say, there is some kind of the economic relations, at least, or at least they were more than between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. So that's why it's, and also taking into account the Turkish economy, not today's certainly, but in general, Turkish economy it could make a much more the faster this resuming of this economic relations. So that's why, from economic point of view, Turkish-Armenian normalization can bring much more stability, economic stability, much more the understanding, much more visits earlier than anything happened between Azerbaijan and Armenians. And at the same time here, the people think that it can also support Azerbaijan-Armenian case, as Azerbaijan-Armenian normalization. So this is.
I mean, Zaur, one of the things is that, you know, historically, Turkey has always been under Azerbaijani lobby influence to not open the border, as you mentioned. But Mehmet Çavuşoğlu also mentioned that, you know, that when it comes to the normalization this time around, they are going to consult with Azerbaijan. But I have a sense that this is already a divorced issue for opening the border, as well as relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan in whatever form. I'm not just talking about economic one. But that's one. And the other thing is that I completely agree with you on the issue that this is an economic issue, but and also the benefits, if there are any, there are going to be any, are not going to be obvious for another couple of years. But one thing that people don't realize, including ourselves, including myself sometimes, is that it's not a simple math. It's not a simple business, it's not transactional. There are a lot of sort of feelings, a lot of sentiments, and even if you would end up having economic activity going on or trade going on, there is always going to be that human factor, the human component, where people are not going to trust. Now, this is the, you know, catch-22 question, right? Do economic activities encourage, you know, people to understand each other, or first you have to understand each other and then you can have economic activities? This is something that is debated, right? With US and China, for instance, people argue that, oh, we trade with China, and then by trading, we introduce ideas of human rights and so on and so forth. Others say, no, you cannot trade with them unless they recognize this. And this is the dichotomy, you know, the either or, the duality, the binary that when it comes to these issues, people deal with. Add to that, to the mix, the issue of not only normalizing, but reconciliation, which is again one of the key components of 2009, which seems to be completely sort of removed now. This is about state-to-state relations, opening border, establishing diplomatic relations, and let's see. Right? There is no conversation about the rest, about issues, about, you know, I can do business with you and I don't like you, right? And I don't want to do any kind of cooperative thing with you. This is more like what is going on. And this is one of the things that I had mentioned, a couple of policymakers here, is that, you know, the current government has been screwed. You know, they really messed up with the war and the promise and the potential of the so-called Velvet Revolution. What's the worst that could happen now? If they push forward, if they reconcile, if they open the border, if they normalize relations and so on and so forth, are people going to call them double traitor or double this and so on? This is why, even though from an Armenian perspective or looking at Armenia, they don't have the hardware nor the software to negotiate well, but at the same time, it's a historic moment to really push forward and get it over with. And this is where Azerbaijan also plays a role in terms of not escalating, building confidence by, you know, again, it's wishful thinking. And one thing I have to mention, I forgot to mention, if I may, is the issue of how the political landscape, the internal political landscape has changed from the war, both in Armenia and Azerbaijan. After 30 years or 25 years of the Aliyev regime, you know, with its less than democratic, let's say, practices and the promise of Azerbaijan regaining Karabakh and so on achieved, it can be a double-edged sword, because then they would say, see, we promised, we delivered what we promised, so keep your mouth shut, no opposition. Or that could actually divert attention from different political actors in Azerbaijan to be more politically active. Whereas in Armenia, we're seeing almost a reverse, not radically, but almost a reverse, where a government that promised openness and dialogue and so on within all aspects of society is becoming more and more paranoid, more and more controlling, and less willing to negotiate, less willing to sit down with opponents.
Okay. Thank you for your valuable source, but let me start with the last. I think the pressing issue in Baku in coming years for domestic point of view is that about the return of IDPs. So this is most important issue, and also this is how it is going to be happen, and how the safely and securely they will return, and how the employment will be, and how the sustainable solution will be present to them is most important the issue. And so that's why the government interest or investment is going on this direction. So, and also there are so this issue will be the top priority, what I see. And coming to the second question, which comes first, the economic, let's say, restoring economic relations, or let's say restoring the trust and then economic relations? I think based on the fact or based on the observation, and this issue, Azerbaijan-Armenian issue, is very unique. Every issue is unique, but let's say less stability, no violence is sometimes is enough. Some people, especially in the border communities, to see the benefit of the peace. So I'm not talking even about the economic, restoring economic relations or trade. So even the stability, non-violence is a key benefit of the peace for many people. So I observed this, or my colleague also observed this in back to 2009, when there was the Dushanbe agreement, when the decrease of the ceasefire. So if the sides will sustain the non-violence and to work on this delimitation and demarcation, and also if we couldn't see any single shoot from both sides and full stability, believe me, this will be a key achievement, at least so for this the direction. And adding that economic relations, trade, it will foster more, let's say, the kind of the issues. But coming to the reconciliation, I think the both sides, their society should reconcile inside them. So there should be reconciliation in Azerbaijan, there should be reconciliation in Armenia. So then I think we can talk about the reconciliation between Azerbaijan and Armenians. And so that's a key takeaway for me, let's say, from the last year, that there should be reconciliation first here in Azerbaijan. So reconciliation, because the most important issue was about this displaced people in Azerbaijan. So you can hear every time in every issue, and also a lot of investment made to these people. So the social,
嗯哼
funds and the housing. So that's why right now it seems that it will be much more easy to reconciliation, but I don't see the drivers of the reconciliation inside the society. I think so. I mean that the peacemakers or the people that to explain the situation.
Is it an issue of hardware? As I was doing the analogy for foreign policy, the problem in Azerbaijan, is it the issue of hardware, the people, or the software, the thinking, or the strategy to achieve that reconciliation within Azerbaijan?
Okay.
I don't want to put you on the spot, because that is important, because you might have the people, but not the environment, nor the right thinking, the strategic thinking.
I think environment is important, but people should create first environment, and they should so at least to start with a small circle, so then to move to the focus, and the media is critical. So I don't see that the media dimension between Azerbaijan and Armenia is quite absent. So even my personal observation that I see that media dimension in Turkish-Armenian rapprochement is much more stronger. Point back to 2009, 2010, or unlike the Azerbaijan-Armenian case. So this media dimension, the language, so is absent here. So that's, I think that the media seems to me an instrument, so the key instrument, and also environment creator. But about your software hardware question, I will answer privately, not here.
We have some questions coming from the audience, also on my phone, and some here, but there's one I want to raise. Another actor we didn't discuss yet, traditionally asked in these webinars, diaspora. So what's the role in both Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, but positive, negative, one question. But I want to also pair it with Asbed, your question of software and hardware. Is there any role potentially if the diaspora and hardware in your language?
Okay.
To Asbed, and now you froze.
No, it's quite a big challenge. I mean, this issue of Armenia and its diaspora and their interaction, it has always been an uneasy marriage. I mean, Armenia's independence in 1991 was the best news that for the Armenian diaspora that had no effect whatsoever on its daily life. In other words, there was a great news, Armenia is independent, but it didn't have any impact on the diasporan institutions and mentality. I mean, this is a whole different discussion about diasporas and how, and for all diasporas, methodologically look at it, there's always that disconnect between the reality on the ground and what they view the reality on the ground is. There is a romanticized version, there is more nationalist version. There are people, there is the relationship between government and diaspora. We saw this during the first Armenian president tenure, where the diaspora, large segments of the diaspora felt that they are they're left out and so on and so forth. But I don't think that the issue of the diaspora has anything to do with the issue of normalization. Now, in order for reconciliation, then there is a role to play because they are a segment of the nation. See, the Armenian government or the Armenian prime minister is not the all Armenian prime minister, is the prime minister of Armenia. Whereas when we talk about Azerbaijan, where they do have a diaspora, a growing diaspora, but it is not, it's relatively new. And as such, there is no divergence in terms of perception when it comes to these issues. So I think at the end of the day, it's not, I mean, the diaspora at this point, it doesn't have a role to play. I don't see that it's playing a role. I'm not saying that it shouldn't have, but I don't see it playing a role. And in terms of hardware, yes, there might be individuals who can be of help and so on, but then at the same time, there is an issue of how they think. Do they think the same way as the government's vision, and so on and so forth?
Sorry, thank you. Turning to what's possible, the peace process is overall have changed. You mentioned yesterday, in the past, all the previous really the peace process had in civil society dimension, reconciliation dimension, whether it came to Turkey, Armenia, or to Armenia, Azerbaijan. Right? We had negotiations, we had official track protocols, but they were always supported by the very heavy investment into people-to-people academic contacts and so on. So that dimension seems to be absolutely missing. And for the reasons kind of in a way not limited to our region. Overall, the world is moving away from the other liberal democratic civil society supported led dimension. So within that, with that in mind, right, how do you see a possibility of solving humanitarian issues and reconciliation related questions? Let's say even the borders open up and the railways open up rather, and so on. So right, that's one dimension of the normalization and the conversation. You were stressing the importance of that human reconciliation. Is there any space for it? And what is that model? Yeah, if it's not civil society supported process, what is it then? Do you see any possibilities for that and in what form? Whoever would like to take.
Zaur, you might want to take this initially.
Yes. Also, so I would like to start with that Phil said that imagine that the transport corridor is open. I think that this is a. So I know that he's not me. He doesn't meant it, but I think that we should also explain that the opening transport corridor it will take a minimum 1 or 2 years minimum. So because investment, and also we are not discussing who's going to invest and how. I mean the restoration of the railway points and other things. So this is a huge work, and also this is opportunity employment. So for people, and I think again I'm returning back to this the study 2014. It estimates that $500 billion needs for restoration of the railway and all pre-existed Soviet infrastructure between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So that's why this is another issue that we will see coming questions in the next 2 years, that who and how. And the coming to your question that how we should start. I think this investment on the civil society is not enough, or might be it's not a lesson learned from the 20 years, 25 years is that so bringing only the small number of the people together and discussing and agreeing and having an empathy is not enough, and it's even not let's say driving any positivity in the Azerbaijan Armenian dimension. That's why when I say the reconciliation inside the country, I mean that the society, there should be a driving force in society to discuss how we see our future as a country. As a region, so and how what we would like to achieve. So it's a kind of the national discussion, national forums in the two countries, and so this also related to the let's say Azerbaijan Armenian the issue, how they see and how we can let's say how the neighboring relations will be restored. So it's not an urgent issue for Baku, because let's say the return of the IDPs will take the years. So then I think they are thinking that this neighboring issue, being a neighbor with Armenians, will be a real issue. But before that, I think we should focus on this issue. So first about national forums, national discussions. So kind of, I don't know how we can do this. It's not only related to Armenian issue, let's say, when we talk about in Azerbaijan. So it's all about how we see the future of the region. So then media, they should be much more focused on the media, improvement of the media, quality, quantity, and also there should be might be a special, let's say, the website is or the agencies working on Azerbaijan Armenian dimension. And then I think the time will come that we can talk about how we can restore reconciliation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So I think the first I see that inside the country, then any kind of Azerbaijan Armenian.
This is something you mentioned, Zaur, earlier, and I was thinking about it in terms of any steps being taken where the other the boogeyman being Armenians and so on and so forth, kept that dialogue from developing in Azerbaijan, and if there are any signs that it's developing or any prospect that it might develop to come to inter-Azerbaijani dialogue. That's one thing. sort of a question. And another thing I have to mention here, when earlier I mentioned about issues related to the diaspora and so on, there is a huge misunderstanding, as someone who has worked on this topic for 20 some years, a huge misunderstanding about what the diaspora is, as an entity that we think of. You can talk about Armenia deciding to do this and that. And by that, you mean the government. You might like it or not, or Azerbaijan doing this or that. But what does the diaspora do, can do, and so on, becomes problematic. By some accounts, whatever the number is, but only 30% maximum of Armenian diaspora is in organized institutions, organized political, social, cultural institutions. So they have leverages, mechanisms to participate in this process or oppose it. But then on the other hand, you have over a large number of individuals who are not affiliated with any organization, some of whom are actually Armenians who recently or in the last 20, 30, 40 years left Armenia. So that is a key dimension to also consider. It's multi-nuanced, multifaceted. And now Azerbaijan is becoming, as Zaur mentioned, also multidimensional, multifaceted, because of the issue of Karabakh removed, so or not being the key issue, and Armenia, the enemy, well, it still is probably, but there's only so much mileage that you can get out of that. So is there any prospect of that dialogue, inter-Azerbaijani dialogue, to be launched, to develop, to go forward?
We have a series of questions from one audience members that are quite diverse internally, but if I can take there is like this overarching theme of the moral dimension, as in, and again, Asbed, the question seems to be directed at you. Is there a moral dimension to this Armenia-Turkey, Armenia-Azerbaijan conversation, as in this, should Armenia even, whatever the political benefits or economic benefits, should Armenia even consider reconciling, given that it was recently lost a war that has been
yeah, morality is always an issue, right? Morality is, sorry, Phil, I think you continued. Okay, well, the issue of morality when it comes to politics is murky at best. Again, we're talking about states. States are not driven by morality, no matter what they claim. State policy, doing the right thing and the just thing are two opposite things, two different things. If you're lucky, they're both going to be the same. What is the right thing to do, and what is the just thing to do? The right thing based on circumstances. So yes, morality should always be there in terms of making decisions and so on. But it cannot be. It can be a guideline rather than strategy, tactic. You cannot base foreign policy or any policy based on moral tactics. It can be there. And more often than not, you actually would end up trading one thing with another. So the answer is yes, there should be, but to what extent it is there, it can be, that's another thing.
Zaur, the last question probably more directed to you. It's more around if we are going in direction of normalization in some form, how much is this constant escalation by Azerbaijan, whether it's inclusion into the Armenian territory, or at least the way I see it, or militarist rhetoric essentially still remaining, not really receding, and what at least in Armenia perceived as anti-Armenian rhetoric, that seemed to be harmful. Essentially, what is then, how do we move from here, assuming that Azerbaijan also, to some degree, seems to be interested in normalizing and announcing that this conflict is effectively over, that requires normalization as well. How do you see that changing?
Yeah, I think this the first I would like to disclaim one thing is that, so when we talk about Azerbaijan and Azerbaijanis, so sometimes we talk about Azerbaijan thinking like this or Azerbaijan is thinking like that. It's also it's not a right thing, so it's not a misguide us, could misguide us. So that's why I think What I see that the demarcation and delimitation of the border will be enough to the escalation of this the situation in the border areas. So I truly let's say observe this. So and why we have these things are happening, because let's say they were after the first Karabakh War, some international border areas, or especially the 7 regions were under the control of Armenians. So, and also this was a part of the Azerbaijan-Armenian international border area. So the second issue is that there are the parts of the territories that the jure Armenian territory under Azerbaijani control, and there is a de jure Azerbaijan territories are under Armenian control, like the 7th, let's say, village of Azerbaijan, and also Artvashen, the de jure Armenian territory inside Azerbaijan. So that's why it's a very complicated issue, and this is I do believe that delimitation and demarcation, so the work will actually could eliminate this, but there should be much more effort from the sides to achieve this. So if there will be any violence again, the huge violence that or the rapid escalation, this will let's say ruin everything, that any hope that about any reconciliation and any normalization process. So this is one thing. So that's why this should be taken a lesson for sides not to repeat the issue, and to back to work on this issue. So if there will be again the rapid escalation, this will, I don't see that if there is any hope, this will be ruined. But otherwise, I think that I hope that there will be much more stabilization in international border areas, and the work on this border delimitation will eliminate this issue. This is my hope, and if it's going to happen, so then we will see the benefit of the peace, or people will see that at least this the non-violence or the no ceasefire violation will be a main benefit of the peace.
One more thing just before finishing up, to add to this. I think to a large extent, there are so many parallel tracks going on that need to be done, at least from our perspective, right? If you're human, you can't focus on so many things, but as a state, as government, you have the luxury to do that. And other than the inter-country dialogues that Zaur mentioned, and also the issue of border, the moment, you can resolve it or start resolving it, it's the less the chances of escalation, granted. But then there's also the issue of rhetoric that is quite problematic in terms of still operating. I think the problem with Azerbaijan is that, the problem, we all have problems, but one of the key issues within Azerbaijan's rhetoric is that it has been conditioned for 30 years to speak in a certain way, to represent or to talk about Armenia in a certain way. And they are not able to switch the lexicon, to not able to change it. And that sometimes escalates the war of words, and also the trust, the mutual trust, if there's going to be any, for that matter. So it's quite interesting. Transition from a victim to non-victim is a very difficult process. We know it for individuals, but it's even more difficult for a nation or for a state. And I think this is also something to wish for, since it's the time for wishes, right at the end of the year, wishful thinking and wishes. I think that's also a key component.
One final, if possible, 1-minute answer. So we outlined a lot of challenges, but if there is a hope, or if there is a chance, how do you see it? Where do you see it? If you can have a 1 minute, as you said, end of the year, maybe not a wish, but a hope.
Zaur, you're more optimistic than I am.
So could you please repeat the question? So I missed.
Yeah, we mostly focused on challenges. I'm saying if there is you probably less so. But if there is a hope moving forward for normalization, for not return to large-scale violence, so where is that kind of first step towards that hope? How do you see? Where should we look for that hope?
I think Fortunately or unfortunately, this is going still the any hope that will be state-driven and that bilateral format. So I don't see that any hope that I can tell that about. I can see that societal level driven any hope for Azerbaijan-Armenian reconciliation, but the most things will be a state-driven and Azerbaijan and Armenia. So about the trade or the border limitation or any discussion or much more the one-to-one meetings, and also Turkish-Armenian normalization. I think there might be Turkish-Armenian normalization. There might be more skepticism is coming from different part of the region, but it could be a game changer.
Okay. Thank you, Zaur. Asbed?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back and actually steal, or we have talked about this in our previous conversation. I think the hope would be with resettlement or of Azerbaijanis in Nagorno-Karabakh and the proximity to Armenian villages and Armenians, I think, and to see on the ground any kind of interaction. Again, wishful thinking, but you know, that could also be the foundations for reconciliation. I think, granted that the states do not intervene and do not shape the rhetoric. So, people on the ground, as Zaur started saying. So,
and thank you for, again, a number of times joining. It was really interesting to be with you all throughout this year and continually see the discussion, the progression, and try to analyze it together and make sense of it. So very much appreciated. Sevil, thank you for hosting us. Zaur, Asbed.
Thank you.
Everybody, yeah, and happy upcoming year. Hopefully a better one.
Thank you very much.